Long before goth culture had a name, before spooky and kooky became a marketing slogan, there was a household that ran on backwards logic. A family that adored thunderstorms, kept a lion in the den, and genuinely believed they were the most normal people on the block. The Addams Family premiered on ABC in 1964, and for 2 seasons it turned a New Yorker cartoon into a strange little TV institution. What audiences saw on screen was odd enough on its own. What was happening just off camera, though, was often even stranger. Here are 15 facts about the making of the Addams Family that most fans never learned. Stick with us to the end, because the story behind Morticia's famous glide is one of the strangest production secrets of the whole series. Cartoonist Charles Addams began drawing his macabre little family for The New Yorker back in the 1930s, and for nearly 2 decades, none of them had names at all. They were simply the family, a gag built on mood and atmosphere rather than character identity. Addams didn't need names because his cartoons were single panels, self-contained jokes that didn't require ongoing continuity. It wasn't until a toy company wanted to license the characters for a doll line in the early 1960s that anyone sat down and worked out who these people actually were. Addams reportedly wanted the father figure to be called Rapelli, a name that telegraphed exactly what kind of first impression he wanted the character to make. Producers and network executives disagreed, and the softer, more elegant Gomez won out instead. The Addams surname itself wasn't even a deliberate choice for the family. It was simply the cartoonist's own last name, attached to the strip because a television show needed a title card, and Addams Family was sitting right there. Of the family's now iconic names, Morticia and Wednesday actually predate the television series. Both were chosen specifically for a 1962 doll collection, 2 years before the sitcom ever aired. Morticia was a fairly unsubtle play on mortician, which fits the family's general approach to subtlety, namely, having none. Wednesday came from an old nursery rhyme about the days of the week, the one that claims Wednesday's child is full of woe. It's a fitting name that essentially wrote the character's entire personality before a single line of dialogue was recorded. Pugsley, on the other hand, had to wait for the show itself. Early drafts floated the name Qbert, but network censors at ABC weren't fond of it, and Pugsley won out instead, a name that sounds simultaneously cuddly and slightly menacing, which was more or less the family brand. When John Astin walked into his audition for the Addams Family, he wasn't reading for Gomez. He was trying out for Lurch, the towering, nearly silent butler whose entire performance style was built on stillness and disapproval. It's a strange thing to picture now, because Astin's take on Gomez became one of the most manic, high-energy performances in 1960s television, a man who seemed constitutionally incapable of standing still. Producers apparently noticed the mismatch almost immediately and redirected him toward Gomez instead, a role that was still loosely defined on paper. That blank slate turned out to be exactly what Astin needed. He built the character's rapid-fire speech patterns, his theatrical devotion to Morticia, and his tendency to break into fencing poses at the slightest provocation almost entirely from his own instincts, with very little of it locked into the scripts beforehand. Speaking of Lurch, the character was originally conceived as a purely silent role, a hulking presence who appeared, performed his task, and vanished without ever speaking a word. Actor Ted Cassidy played him that way through much of the pilot. Then, during a scene where the family summons him by striking a gong, Cassidy reportedly improvised 2 words on the spot. "You rang?" The delivery, a low, gravelly rumble that sounded like it had traveled up from somewhere underground, apparently caught the crew off guard in the best possible way. Producers realized keeping a voice like that off the show entirely would have been a genuine waste, and the character was rewritten to give Lurch occasional dialogue. Those 2 improvised words are often credited with turning Lurch from a background prop into one of the show's most memorable presences. Yes, the Addams Family really did keep a lion. Kitty Cat, the household's oversized house cat, was portrayed by an actual lion, a retired circus animal brought onto a network television set with what was, by the standards of the era, a surprisingly casual attitude. A trainer stayed on set any day the lion was scheduled to work, and the show's child performers were reportedly kept off the soundstage entirely whenever the animal was present, for obvious safety reasons. In practice, though, Most of the lion footage that ended up on screen was reused stock material, the same handful of shots of the animal walking or growling, recycled across multiple episodes. The most logistically complicated cast member on the show also turned out to have one of the lightest workloads. That finger-snapping theme, instantly recognizable even to people who've never seen a full episode, sounds like a small vocal ensemble performing in eerie harmony. It wasn't. Composer Vic Mizzy wrote and recorded the entire vocal arrangement himself, layering multiple takes of his own voice on top of one another because the production's budget reportedly didn't stretch to hiring backup singers. Ted Cassidy, Lurch himself, contributed the low, deadpan interjections scattered through the track. Mizzy also went to the set personally to direct the cast on how to perform the finger snaps for the opening credits, apparently giving specific notes on tone. Gomez and Morticia, he wanted, should look completely unbothered while snapping, as if the gesture cost them no effort at all. It's a small detail, but it says a lot about how deliberately the show's tone was constructed, right down to 2 seconds of finger percussion. Television in 1964 was still shot in black and white, and black and white cameras of the era had a well-known weakness. Dark colors tended to collapse into indistinguishable murk on screen. Blacks and deep browns lost all their detail. To get around this, the show's art department reportedly built the Addams mansion's interior using unexpectedly bright colors, pinks, reds, and turquoise tones that would have looked completely wrong to Morticia's sensibilities in real life. On camera, though, that same palette translated into rich, moody shadow and convincing gothic atmosphere. The same trick applied to makeup. Actors' faces were done up with green, purple, and brown tones that would look almost clownish in person but rendered as pale, elegant, and faintly unsettling once filtered through a black and white lens. The crooked, towering house glimpsed in the show's title sequence was a real property, a Victorian mansion used briefly during the pilot for exterior shots. Filming on location week after week, however, proved too expensive and impractical for a weekly series, so the production switched to a painted backdrop for later episodes. A matte painting that exaggerated the house's height, added an extra floor, and gave it a Gothic tower that never existed on the real building. Most viewers never noticed the switch, since the painting was designed to blend seamlessly with whatever exterior shots remained. The Real house didn't survive much longer than the show itself. It was demolished a few years after the series ended, and today the site has been repurposed for entirely mundane use. A fate that feels almost like a punchline the Addamses themselves might have appreciated. The disembodied hand known as Thing was, for most of its appearances, portrayed by Ted Cassidy, who, on top of playing Lurch, would lie beneath the set on a low platform, reaching up through hidden compartments in the furniture whenever the hand needed to appear. Because Cassidy occasionally had to be Lurch and Thing in the same scene, a stand-in performer sometimes filled in for the hand when both characters needed to be visible at once. Cassidy reportedly amused himself during filming by alternating which hand he used for Thing's appearances, switching between left and right without any explanation, seemingly just to see whether anyone in the audience would notice the inconsistency. It's the kind of quiet, victimless mischief that fits right into the show's spirit. In a genuine coincidence, 2 different networks developed spooky family sitcoms at almost exactly the same time, apparently without either one realizing what the other was working on until it was too late to change course. ABC had the Addams Family in production. CBS was simultaneously developing The Munsters. Both shows premiered within roughly a week of each other in the fall of 1964. On paper, the concepts sound nearly identical, but the execution differed in a meaningful way. The Munsters were essentially classic movie monsters awkwardly trying to pass as an ordinary American family and mostly failing. The Addamses, by contrast, were wealthy eccentrics who were entirely comfortable in their own skin and genuinely didn't register that anyone found them strange. One show was built around the anxiety of not fitting in, the other around a family too self-assured to notice that they didn't. The character built entirely out of a pile of flowing hair, a bowler hat, and sunglasses became one of the show's most quotable oddities, despite having no visible face and dialogue that was mostly gibberish, dubbed in during post-production. What audiences didn't see was that the original costume, reportedly made from real human hair, was heavy, hot, and highly flammable, a serious concern on a 1960s set where crew members smoked constantly between takes. According to accounts from the production, the costume was eventually switched to a synthetic, more fire-resistant material after the safety risk became too obvious to ignore. The actor inside the suit, a performer well under 5 feet tall, reportedly had almost no visibility while wearing it and was largely just given instructions to wander the set and hope for the best. The version of Wednesday most people picture today, deadpan, morbid, entirely unimpressed by the world, is not the character as she originally appeared. In the 1964 series, Wednesday was played as a genuinely sweet, warm little girl who smiled easily, kept a pet spider as a source of childlike affection rather than menace, and generally behaved like any other television child of the era, minus a few gothic accessories. It wasn't until the 1991 feature film reinterpreted the character as icy, calculating, and perpetually disappointed that Wednesday Addams became shorthand for a very specific kind of deadpan darkness. Every subsequent version of the character, including the more recent Netflix interpretation, has largely built on that later, colder portrayal rather than the cheerful original, meaning the classic Wednesday most fans know is actually a reinvention, not the source material. Actor Jackie Coogan's first audition for Uncle Fester reportedly didn't go well. Producers apparently felt he wasn't quite strange enough for the part. Rather than accept the note, Coogan went home, shaved his head and eyebrows himself, and built the character's entire visual identity from scratch, working directly from Charles Addams's original cartoon drawings rather than relying on the costume department. Other actors auditioning for the role had shown up in bald caps, a safer and more reversible commitment. Coogan's transformation was permanent, at least for the duration of the show, and when he returned to audition a second time, there was reportedly nothing left for producers to critique. The character was simply standing in front of them, fully formed. It's a rare case of an actor being told he wasn't right for a part and responding by making the part impossible to give to anyone else. Charles Addams had been publishing his eerie little cartoons in The New Yorker for decades by the time the television series premiered, but the magazine's leadership reportedly wasn't thrilled about the family's new mainstream popularity. Once the sitcom became a hit, the magazine's longtime editor apparently barred any further Addams Family cartoons from its pages, not out of any dispute over royalties, but reportedly over a matter of taste, with television seen as a lower, less prestigious medium than the magazine's traditionally literary readership. The unofficial ban lasted for years, only lifting after a change in the magazine's editorial leadership. By most accounts, Addams found ways to keep the family alive in the background of other cartoons in the meantime, tucking recognizable figures into unrelated strips where sharp-eyed readers might spot them. Carolyn Jones made Morticia's slow, smooth movement across every room look completely natural, almost as if the character had never learned to walk any other way. In reality, that glide had nothing to do with performance choice and everything to do with wardrobe. Morticia's signature gown was reportedly a hobble-style dress, skin-tight and deliberately restrictive, designed in a way that made large or fast steps physically impossible. Jones simply couldn't move any other way while wearing it. Reports from the production suggest the costume department eventually had to sew fasteners into the back just so she could get in and out of it between takes, and that removing the full ensemble at the end of a shooting day could take a significant chunk of time on its own. What looked like an elegant, almost supernatural way of moving through a room was, behind the scenes, simply a costume department leaving an actor with no other option. And that's 15 strange, surprising stories from behind the scenes of the Addams Family. A show that looked shadowy and unsettling on screen was, in almost every case, built on some fairly ordinary, and occasionally chaotic, production realities underneath. If any of these facts surprised you, let us know which one in the comments, and we'll see you next time.